go again, coming at you another movie review. And as you can tell from the title up there, today I'm reviewing the newest entry in the Child Play series, Curse of Chucky. Now, as you can already tell from the previous reviews, I'm a fan of this series. The first two films are my favorite. Third film, decent, I guess, if I remember right. That's my feelings on it. Bride of Chucky, I think, even though it's more of a horror comedy, I think it's better than 3. Seed, basically killed the franchise, even though it has some interesting moments, mostly for dark comedy, like what happens to John Waters. But when I heard they were making this film, I'm like, it better be going back to the roots of the series, and I could say it did. It goes back to the full-on horror elements of the series, which is a good thing. And I'm actually glad that they decided to do a sequel instead of a remake, because Child's Play is just one of those films that I don't really think you can remake it and actually make it on par or better. It's just one of those ones that's better to leave it alone. I mean, like The Thing, you could do you could have done that. The Fly, you did. The Blob, that one you could have, and they did. Friday the 13th is both a remake and a reboot, and they did it in an interesting way. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, they did, and I thought they did it in an interesting way. Nightmare on Elm Street, we all know how that turned out. Anyway, enough of talking about that. What did I think about the film? I thought the film was decent. I don't love the film, but I don't, hate the film like But it just is decent. I mean, it has some good moments that I like, and it also is, but there are moments that's like It's basically, basically on the whole, I can see why this went direct to video, because this would have been, sitting in the theater would have been like, okay. Would have been nice for me to actually see Chucky on the big screen, because that's one guy I never have seen on the big screen. I've seen Michael on the big screen, I've seen Jason on the big screen, I've seen Freddy on the big screen. Even though it was a remake, I still saw him on the big screen. I saw Leatherface on the big screen, the 03 remake. That's it, I think. Anyway. Now, one thing I will say is that one of the things I heard initially about this film is not true, and that is I heard that this film was only a sequel to the original 3 films. And I don't know if it was the writer-director, Don Mancini, who said that, or someone connected to the film. But whoever said that, they lied. This is not a sequel to the first 3 films. It is a sequel to the entire series. Now, I bet you're saying, how do I know that? Well, other than the fact I just watched the movie, here are the 2 giveaways that it's a sequel to all the films. 1, as we find out, Chucky actually has the scars that are on his face. Which, of course, that also shows why some of those early pictures of Chucky look like, just make his face look weird. Because after they take that off, I'm guessing it's supposed to be liquid latex or something, his face looks a lot better, or at least the puppet does. I don't know if it was a different puppet that they modified to make it look weird like that or something. It just was weird. That was going to be one of my problems with the film, was that Chucky's puppetry looked awful. After that I'm like, okay, that's why. Still looks a little weird, but it doesn't bother me anymore. The other thing is the fact that Tiffany has a brief moment in the film, which her little appearance in the film is a homage to the opening of Bride of Chucky. Those are the 2 major ones. And there's probably more I probably noticed if I watched the film a couple more times, but that's about it. And it's like, okay, they probably did that because they didn't want to spoil those little things, but they shouldn't have said anything. They should have just said it's a sequel. But nowadays people want to know everything about the film before it comes out. That's part of the reason whenever they're posting little tidbits about films that come out, I don't look at them because I don't want to have my enjoyment of watching the film spoiled. Now, anyway, the film was directed by Don Mancini, who has been the writer behind all these films, and directed Seed of Chucky. And I will say, directing-wise, he did a better job with this film. Maybe it's the fact this is actually a straight horror film instead of a horror comedy, but I thought he used the camera a little bit better. And he got decent performances out of the actors. And thought how he shot some of the scenes was good. Yeah, sorry about that. I hate this freaking phone ringing when I'm doing videos, but anyway, I thought as I said, I thought he'd use the camera well. There's actually one shot in the movie I really did like. It's near the beginning of the movie, so if you it won't be hard to miss. It's when the first murder victim is found. You see blood running slowly across the floor, and then you see the person who finds the body reflected in the blood. I don't know if he came up with that himself or if that's a homage to a scene in another movie, but that's an excellent shot. And of course, there's other nice ones, but that's a shot that is like, ooh, that's cool. And of course, he wrote it, and not to say this is a step up from Seed, but I'd still rather watch 1, 2, and Bride over this. Score is by Joseph Loduca, and it's fitting for the film. Now, the plot of the film is it takes place several years after the conclusions of the previous film. How many, it doesn't say in the film, but it takes place about 25 years after the events of the original film, as we find out later. Now, Chucky, he arrives mysteriously in the mail of at the family home of a paraplegic girl, Nika, played by Fiona Dourif, who is Brad Dourif's daughter, and her mother, Sarah. You get a little insight into their relationship, is that Nika doesn't like the fact that she has to live with her mother, which we don't find out until later why she's a paraplegic. At the beginning, when they were talking about it, I thought it was an accident she recently had, and that she doesn't like the fact she had the accident and has to live with her mother now, but basically she's been like this her whole life, and I'm glad that you actually find that out later. Adds a little bit to her relationship with her mother, and as we find out, her sister. Now, of course, Sarah, the mother, becomes the first victim, which you don't see enough of her for the mother to say whether or not you actually think she kind of deserves it or not, but also you don't see enough about the mother to actually feel sorry for her. The only, I guess, sympathy you could feel is the fact that the daughter's the one that finds the body. And, of course, they think it's a suicide. Why, I don't know. Nika, of course, is going through grieving when her domineering older sister, Barb, played by Danielle, I'm going to have trouble with this last name, it looks Italian, Bisutti, Bisutti, arrives with her family, which is her husband, Ian, her daughter, Alice, and their live-in nanny, Jill. And they're there to help Nika settle the mother's affairs. And, of course, there's also Father Frank from a local parish who's there to counsel the family. Of course, Alice finds Chucky, and the typical thing with the children in these movies, Chucky lets them in on their secret. We don't see it, but we know what happens. And that's one thing that this film, if you did not know this was a sequel, that this film does with how it's shot, is that for the first act of the film, it kind of gives up the vibe that it is a remake of the original film, but with a different story and all that. And I think that's a little interesting to go with that. I mean, it sets it apart from the other sequels, because the second film, Chucky, we already knew was alive. Third film, same thing. Bride, he has to be resurrected, and he's with Tiffany. In the fifth film, Seed, the comedy thing. So it sets it apart from the other sequels. And at least personally, I didn't have the Predators or Thing vibe, where it felt too much like the first film. This one, it's has a different setting and tone, and the characters are different enough to where it doesn't bother me that much. But that's just me. Now, as you can probably tell, Chucky's eventually going to start killing off people one by one. Who and why, I'm not going to go into, but it looks like the deaths were practical with some CGI. We'll have to watch the film and look at it more carefully. But I know at least one of my favorite death scenes is the death of the priest, which I'm not going to spoil the whole context of it, but it ends with him having his head decapitated. And I looked at him like, ew, that looks so good. And it looks like maybe it's the lighting or maybe it's me having to look at it again, but it looked like it was all practical with only like maybe some minuscule CGI enhancement. If that's the case, they need to do that more in horror films like that. Use CGI only to enhance, not to cover. Thing prequel. Now, one thing I must note is the relationship between Nika and Barb. You can tell you buy them as sisters, or at least I did. But you can tell they don't have a good relationship, and that's mostly because Barb is domineering, and part of it has to do with the fact she's the older sister and that her younger sister is a paraplegic. And you know how, if you have siblings, you can understand how older siblings usually want to look out for the younger siblings. I have that both ways since I have younger siblings and an older sibling, so I see it from both sides. So maybe I just have that maybe I have that perspective, I guess. But it doesn't excuse, it's not a justification for Barb to be as bitchy as she is in the movie. Now, near the end of it, when she thinks her sister knows something or something, that I can see, but it's still like, oh. But early on, you're like, man, this girl is a bitch. And I have to say, out of all the jerk characters that have been in the series, I have to say Barb is probably the one I actually wanted to die the most. I said might. Because it's kind of hard to top John Ritter and Bride a little bit, because he was a corrupt cop. I say corrupt because he abused his power. Maybe he didn't. You have to say he probably took bribes occasionally. And that's kind of hard, but I have to say she probably was on par with the jerk character from Child's Play 3. And she was obviously worse than the jerk dad in Child's Play 2 because, and again, he might actually be a little worse, but I guess it looks at it. I guess it depends on what perspective you look at it from. But like Phil and John Ritter's character, I was actually waiting for her to die, and I'm like, okay, she got it good. She even got a good one-liner. You have your mother's eyes. They were always too close together. Not the best Chucky one-liner, you know, doesn't beat How's It Hangin' Phil, but still pretty good. Now, how Anika finds out Chucky is alive, it is, you know, something out of this, of the 21st century, but it worked a little bit, especially with how it's set up, you know, finding out where the doll came from and all that. And I have to say, probably one of the best things about this film, and one of the things I actually like, is that we actually find out a little bit more about Chucky's past, because up until this point, the only things about Chucky's past before he died and went into the doll was the fact that he was a murderer, practiced voodoo, and for the first three films, that's all we needed. Then in Bride, we found out he was in a relationship with a woman called Tiffany, and I don't know if it's just me, but I've always viewed that relationship as similar to the relationship between the Joker and Harley Quinn. Whereas that he used her, she was obsessed with him or loved him in a weird manner and would do anything for him. Whereas if Chucky felt any attachment for her, we don't know. Because Chucky apparently, it's hard to tell, but it seems like he doesn't genuinely love Tiffany until he sees that she really will kill people like that. Or maybe he did feel a little bit of it for her, but I don't know, but I guess Joker or Harley Quinn is the best analogy I can sum it up for. If we know that relationship, you can kind of guess what I mean by it. But it's basically a crazy relationship where the guy uses the girl's basically totally obsessed with the guy. That's what it comes down to. So them showing a little bit of Chucky's past in this film that kind of contradicts their relationship, I could buy it. And it also goes with that whole Joker Harley Quinn thing a little bit more, that he probably was just using Tiffany, you know, for maybe a place to stay or crash occasionally, maybe for the occasional sex, and then the thing we see in the flashback. And another thing I like about that is it's nice to actually see Brad Dourif play Chucky physically again, because think of it, he only played Chucky physically twice. Once in the first film at the beginning, and then of course for that brief shot where they had to put him in the costume to take that one picture for that newspaper article we see in Bride. So have a flashback of him in the film is interesting. I thought add a little bit to it. And of course, not everyone might like the reason why the cops are after him there, but we don't see everything in there, so that's probably the reason the cops got onto him and figured out who he was. And then eventually it led to the cops, I know, maybe busting a murder he was going to commit, or seeing him and chasing him and that. I'm guessing that my guess is that it's what led to the cops figuring out who he was, and then busting him when he went to commit a murder. That's just my guess. They don't elaborate a lot on it. And if anything, I was a little bit surprised in the flashback we actually saw footage from the first film, because last time I checked, doesn't MGM still own the rights to the first film? Or did Universal make a deal with them to license some scenes for the movie? I don't know. One thing I would like to find out. I've already brought up the Chucky puppets once in this film. Other than that little thing in the beginning, I thought they looked pretty good. There's a few moments where I'm like, okay, that look weird, and one of the axes he uses in the film at times does look a little fake, but other than that, I thought it was pretty good. Acting in the film, it's decent, nothing Oscar-worthy, but nothing except for maybe a few moments from Ian that I would call wooden. Chantal Quizanal as Sarah. For what she has to do in the film, she's decent. Daniela as Barb, like I said, makes you actually want to hate her. Martinez plays the priest, and I thought he did an okay job, and I'm just curious to see what else this guy's been in, because I want to see, I don't know, maybe it's just the facial hair, but he looks like I might have seen him somewhere. Or maybe that's why he's on that show that my grandmother watches, Longmire. Maybe that's why. Maybe I saw him there. Let's see. Brennan Elliott, he plays Ian. Like I said, a couple moments he's off a little bit. And I don't know if it's just me, but he looks like, kind of looks a little bit like, dang it. The guy's name is escaping my head right now. The guy who replaced Edward Norton as the Incredible Hulk. You guys should know who I'm talking about. Mark Ruffalo. He looks like a young Mark Ruffalo with lighter skin. Or at least in the face he does. And let's see, I'm looking to see what he's been in. Mostly TV work. Desperate Housewives and all that stuff. Like I said, he was...
I think that probably the best actress in the movie out of the main ones was Fiona Dourif. And I can see a little bit of... You can definitely... She is her father's daughter, because obviously this is going to look a little different, you know, because they're different genders, obviously. But you can see that they're similar in the face, and I don't know what look she got from her mother, because I don't know what her mother looks like, but she also kind of, maybe it's just me, she kind of looks like a young Alyssa Milano, almost, kind of in that vibe. And I'm like, yeah, she looks pretty good, and she's 31. I didn't know she was 31. She looked really younger than that. And she has some experience. I mean, she was in an episode of Law & Order SVU where she played a detective. She was in a couple episodes of Deadwood. After the Fall, which was a TV movie. 8 episodes of True Blood. She was in a movie called The Master. Though she is experienced, and I thought she did a pretty good job. Though, of course, we all know the reason she got this role, her dad. But I thought it was interesting to see her in this role, especially with how the plot twist involving the character. No, it's not Chucky, he's her dad, in case you're wondering. That's what I thought it was going to be, but I'm glad they didn't go with something as predictable as that. It's a little bit more psychological, actually, what they went with, but I'm not going to spoil it. And it was interesting to see her working in a scene with her dad, even though her dad's not physically there, and the dialogue between them. And the thing I like about the character of Nika is that she's a former college student, and I guess she was going for a psychological degree or something, or was taking something like that. So I like that she does do a little bit of that with Chucky, and you can tell it pisses him off. And the story of Nika does have kind of a sad ending, which I'm not going to spoil for those of you who haven't seen the movie. But it's like, oh, I know why they probably went with this is that every Chucky movie always has a happy ending, at least most of them do, because first film, they kill Chucky, happy ending. Second film, they kill Chucky, happy ending. Third film, they kill Chucky, happy ending. Fourth film, they kill Chucky, happy ending as far as we know for those two. Well, not for the police detective that finds a kid. Fifth film, they kill Chucky and then a hand attacks. Which, that brings me up into one thing I want to question. If this is a sequel to Seed, how the hell did Chucky get back together again? What, did all the King's horses and all the King's men show up with super glue? Did they somehow go to Oz and get that one glue from the Tin Woodsman book? Now, I have to say, another thing I like about this film is the after-credit sequence, which that would have been interesting to see if they had done that as the whole film, but for the after-credit sequence, it is a very good scene, and it does involve the character of Andy Barclay. And it takes like 6 months later after the end of the film, which with the final shot of the film you could kind of infer how that sequence probably ends up ending. So 6 months later, it's not a big stretch. And with how it ends, I don't think there really will be another Chucky film. If there is, I'll be surprised, because that ending, how the ending of this film ends, perfectly ends the Child's Play series. If you think about it, it just starts with Andy and Chucky having a problem, and it ends in a moment where Chucky's like, oh, fuck. Which I'm not going to spoil it for those of you who haven't seen it, but if you just want to see that scene and Louis and the rest of the movie, I think it's up on YouTube somewhere. And of course, as you can kind of guess, this film does mix reaction people. And check the IMDb score real quick. Has a 5.6 on IMDb, which is more or less what I think it should be. Maybe a little lower. Has a 38 with the audience on Rotten Tomato, which I'm a little surprised it's that low, but maybe not so much. It has a 79 with critics. I think that could be a little lower. I think that's higher than the first two films, actually, if my memory serves me correctly. Now, where do I rank it among the other films? I still think 1, 2, and Bride are superior. And I'll say this is a step up from Seed. Whether or not it's better than 3, I'll say 3 has more going for it story-wise, more driving it. But I think the things that we find out in Curse about Chucky's past kind of make it on par. But it's hard to say which of the two films I'd watch more over the other, because 3 has never been one, as I've said in that review, has never been one I watch a lot. Maybe since I've gotten older. I don't know, maybe this one might grow on me with time, I don't know. But I have to say in conclusion, it's just a decent film. Not what I'll probably be a while. I probably won't watch it again until I watch the series as a whole again. Anyway, my rating for Curse of Chucky, probably a 3 out of 5 stars. I'd say it's worth one watch if you're a Child's Play fan, but note that the first act is kind of slow. Maybe a little bit slower than the first film's first act. It doesn't really pick up until near the end of the second act and the third act. And how the characters are written, they're not as interesting as the previous characters, but if you're just going in it for a horror film, it might be enjoyable. But other than the after credit sequence and some of the stuff about Chucky, you might not want to watch it, though. I watch it mostly because I'm a Child's Play fan.